Hey, good evening. Thank you all for coming out. We're really excited to have you here. Just in brief, my name is Evan Stone. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Educators for Excellence. We are a teacher-led policy and advocacy organization. We've been working in Connecticut for about 12 years to help teachers understand the policy context around them, get more involved in the conversations that impact them and their students. And we're really excited about tonight because it is a big step in a long process of shaping a vision for Hartford Public Schools. And we're honored to have Dr. Torres-Rodriguez here with us, as well as Board Chair Jennifer Hockenholt. Thank you both for being here. And a bunch of the teachers that have been leading a process at E4E to help gather perspectives and opinions from educators across the district to help shape and inform the direction that the district heads. So our role at E4E is to get out of the way and let teachers talk about their wants and desires. And so I'm very excited to turn it over to Carolyn Dowd, who has been one of the leaders of the process at Educators for Excellence. Hi.
Thank you.
Can sit.
Okay. It's been a long day today. Is this on? Okay. So hi, my name is Caroline Dowd. I'm a E4E teacher leader here in Hartford, and I'm also on the NTLC, which is the National Teacher Leadership Council at E4E as well. And I teach at Environmental Sciences Magnet School at Mary Hooker here, and I'm a preschool teacher. Excuse me. So E4E worked with to create with their teacher leaders to create a survey that we distributed throughout Hartford Public Schools to identify key focuses for areas of the strategic planning for the upcoming for the next few years in the future. And we're excited to have you here today to be able to see the results that we gathered from that in partnership with Hartford Public Schools leadership. So thank you guys also for being here today. Before we dive in, I want to set the stage by saying that we know that there's been a lot of important news coming out of Hartford recently, but today's discussion is focused specifically just on the future of HPS as it relates to the 3-year strategic plan. So any other questions could be saved for later or reached out to district leadership at a later time directly. So to kick us off, I want to share the findings from our year-long research process that helped us shape our recommendations for the district's strategic plan. So I'm going to walk you through a methodology and what we learned. So over the 2023, 2024, and part of the 24-25 school years, we engaged in a 3-part process. So first, we conducted hundreds of one-on-one conversations with teachers, including elected members of HFT, Hartford's Federation of Teachers. Through these discussions, we identified 3 high-priority areas that needed attention, specifically financial incentives for specific groups of teachers, school-based flexibility, and professional learning and mentoring. Next, we conducted focus groups with 124 teachers across 6 different schools to dig deeper into those issues. And those conversations helped us understand not just what the challenges were, but what potential solutions are. I think it's easy to have complaints. It's harder to come up with something to do about it. And that was really our goal there. And then finally, this fall, 7 teacher leaders, myself included, met regularly to design and implement a district-wide survey. We received responses from 319 teachers across 28 schools, which is over 20% of our teaching force. And we conducted an additional focus group specifically on special education to add qualitative context to our survey data. So what we learned, we had 2 clear priorities for the strategic plan that emerged from our research. The first was teacher recruitment and retention. That was the top choice by 40% of teachers. And then high quality teaching and learning was selected by 30% of respondents. So these priorities ranked above other important areas like financial sustainability, effective operations, and curriculum implementation. So these are really seen as the highest priorities of current teachers in the classrooms. But what really stood out was the urgent staffing crisis in special education. The data is pretty stark. While special education teachers make up just 15% of the teaching force, they account for 31% of the current vacancies. So 26% of all special education positions are currently vacant. And also part of the problem with special education things is that we see half of the students with disabilities who are chronically absent last year. And then we asked teachers about specific policy solutions. So 36% prioritized higher pay for those hard to staff positions. 26% supported additional compensation for highly effective teachers, and 16% emphasized better alignment with professional learning with curriculum. And these aren't just survey responses. In our focus groups, teachers repeatedly emphasized how important special education is and how those vacancies are affecting every single classroom in the district, stretching both special education and general education teachers to their limits. And I would say that my classroom is one of those. I have 4 kids with IEPs and 3 more that I am currently have been fighting since September to get IEPs, and that impacts both the support that those students are getting as well as my general education students. Both of them are impacted negatively because they can't get the amount of support that they both deserve in their own rights. We're really grateful that district leadership has been receptive to hearing these findings and incorporating teacher voice into the strategic planning process. So I would like to invite Superintendent Rodriguez Torres-Rodriguez, to share how the district is thinking about addressing these challenges through both the strategic plan and legislative priorities. So thank you very much.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. E4E, Evan, the entire team, and of course, our amazing educators. Thank you. I see the team, some team members at central office as well. Glad to be here. I think tonight, this opportunity represents the spirit of our strategic planning process, which is to make sure that we capture as many voices, but particularly our educator voice. And so I'm eager to engage in the conversation and identify how else we can continue to support all of you, because without you, our young people cannot be at their best. And so when we set out to embark on the All Voices, Our Future strategic planning process, it was to capture as many voices as possible. And if you allow me just to really dive into the essence of the approach, which was to engage as many community members as possible. And the depth and the breadth of the strategic planning process really was instrumental in shaping the priorities that I'm gonna show you in a minute, because it does reflect, as you were saying, the hopes and the dreams, not just of our students, but also of our educators, our families, our community partners. And so we set off with phase 0, and I do want to highlight that at the center of that was the leadership of our board chair, Ms. Hakonha, that is here, and the rest of our board, really helping us to devise a way to communicate broadly about the strategic plan, hosting a retreat with our board members to discuss the process and what it would make it, we felt, successful. And we really heard also from our board, it was in alignment with what we wanted to do, which was, yes, make sure that we have a transparent and inclusive engaging process. And in addition, to have community input. And for me, it was important to have feedback loops, which is why we have several phases throughout. And so phase 1 collected and analyzed over 2,900 survey responses, focus groups, one-on-one interviews. I spoke to a variety of community members, including our students, our faith-based leaders, industry advisory boards. And then now phase 2, which we have concluded, was, we really wanted to sharpen the focus and get at reviewing those common trends and ideas that came up from the, transcribing of all of the information that we heard. And then, and I say we, but it's in partner with our team members at, Columbia University and their research lab. Again, we wanted to make sure that we were able to step back and allow them to really engage with the information and the data and the voices that we were hearing. And so right now we are yet again collecting additional feedback. This is another feedback loop. And so the surveys are being completed thus far, 310 additional surveys that have come in. And the last activity actually happened today, this afternoon, with our school leaders, where we went back and shared some of the action plans, the actions that we have already shared with the board to get additional feedback around what they thought the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities were with all of those actions. And so if we go to the next slide, this is an aerial view here of the draft strategic priorities and objectives. They were, again, developed by analyzing the key ideas, the resonating themes across all of the phases, phase 1 and phase 2, and then the team then created these high-level buckets, if you will. And so the first one up top is whole and healthy students, about nurturing the whole student, their academic, their personal, mental, social, physical selves, not only in school, but also we know outside of school. And you can think of this strategic priority as essentially like the cornerstone, the foundation in the arc, if you will. And then there are strategic objectives that focus on mental health, for example, high quality instruction, strong pathways, targeted focus on students with the most needs. We heard that recurring throughout the groups that gave feedback, including students with special education needs or our multilingual learners. The second priority that we have is around expansive learning and opportunity, and that one relates to really getting at genuine partnerships between our educators and our external community, really to provide students with a real world enriching experience that they tell us all the time that they want more and more and more of. The strategic objectives include having, and by the way, the other piece that connects to that that we heard was relative to trusting in collaborative relationships at all levels of the organization. That is not just trusting in collaborative partnerships with external partners. That also has to happen across all levels, up and down, with students to teachers, families to staff in schools, teacher to teacher, teacher to administrator, central office, all levels. And then the strategic priorities around open, transparent, accessible communication, and making sure that, all towards offering engaging real-world experiences for our young people. The third priority, which I was hearing a lot in what you were saying in the data that you were sharing, skilled and diverse teams, focusing on keeping, recruiting, but then also keeping our staff here to benefit, our students, and then whether that is through strengthening the pipelines, increasing compensation, greater differentiation of professional learning. We hear that all the time, One size doesn't fit all for our students. One size should not and does not fit all for our adult learners either. And some of the strategic priorities, objectives there relate to how do we honor the variance in terms of the experiences and the interests of our educators, by providing that differentiated, individualized professional learning. How do we increase the compensation to attract and retain? How do we improve the hiring process? All towards making sure that our educators are at their best to support our students. And finally, the fourth theme, operational efficiency, operational and management excellence, which really relates to the available resources. How do we leverage those in the most effective way to provide that high quality service for, yes, our students through instruction, but also to all of you, because you all also benefit and need for us to deliver operationally in excellent ways. And some of the objectives here include managing the resources more equitably and strategically, engaging in legislative advocacy, which many of you have been part of, and we continue to do so. Improving management at all levels of the organizational system, and then making sure that there is the delivery of, that we maintain the integrity of the commitment of the strategic plan. If we say these are the things that are going to happen in year one, that there is intentionality behind staying true to that. So if we go to the next slide, I'll quickly highlight that there's been a lot of work and continues to be work around the legislative priorities. And so here's an aerial view as to what some of the proposals that we've asked, that we've included and have put forth. Focusing on supporting our education cost sharing formula and making sure that, right, our state leaders stay true to that. Focusing on specific targeted programmatic opportunities. We know that we serve a concentration of need in our district. And we know that we have actually specialized programs that are serving students really well in Hartford Public Schools. We just wish that we had resources to do more of those. By the way, I see in the back Stephen Tatum. I didn't see you before. Hello, board member Tatum. And so we were asking for additional funding, and we heard recently that there's going to be money set aside. Not a lot of money, but there's going to be funding set aside for districts to take advantage of the specialized programming. Fully funding the special education excess cost grant, which is a big driver for us in our expenses. Right, we don't have enough in our budget to cover the additional costs that we have to pay out because we don't get full reimbursement yet. Introducing a special education factor in the formula. Right now, Connecticut is one of two across the country states that do not have that special weighted fund formula, and so we're hoping that that gets kicked in there to some degree. And then the other one is unique to us, and that is sustaining the cap on general education magnet tuition. This is just a dynamic that exists for us because we operate magnets and we send students to other magnets. And so there's a cap right now that is kind of holding us steady, and if that were to be lifted, then that would mean that others that operate magnet schools would be able to charge us more money. And so that presents a challenge for us. So that's an overview of the legislative priorities. And then as it relates to what I call the crosswalk, I think is also important for us to see how what you all have, identified in terms of your engagement in your survey and your one-on-ones, your focus groups, how does that relate to the work that we're looking to do and the proposals that we're making? And so here's how closely the recommendations that you all have made with our strategic plan actions and also the legislative priorities, right? This is alignment that I think underscores really a shared voice and shared commitment in terms of strengthening Hartford Public Schools and supporting our educators. So some key areas of alignment here are compensation for special education teachers, right? Teachers recommended annual hiring bonuses and increased pay for special education educators. Our strategic plan specifically prioritizes enhanced compensation for high-need areas, while our legislative advocacy includes, right, introducing that special education factor in the ECS formula to ensure sustaining that sustainable funding. There's also alignment relative to improved professional learning. We hear our educators, you emphasize the need for curriculum-aligned professional learning communities and that differentiated professional learning. And the strategic plan is very explicit about getting at that individualized approach to supporting teacher growth. And then there's also alignment relative to fully funding ECS and special education. We hear it, I heard it in your overview and your feedback about making sure that there's increased state support and even local support around special education funding. And then lastly, in terms of incentives for highly effective teachers, the recommendation to increase pay for top performing teachers aligns with our strategic goal of exploring research-backed incentives and advocacy for resources to support teacher retention and success. And we know there's a research base behind the incentives for highly effective teachers. So just wanted to show the alignment that shows that teacher voices are represented in both district strategies and the state level advocacy. So I want to thank you for your engagement, your collaboration, and the process continues as we continue to finalize the strategic plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Torres-Rodriguez. So first, really exciting to see that alignment because it shows, I think, how the district has already been listening and engaging with teachers and a cross-section of the community. We're going to talk a lot about, or not a lot, at the end of this, we're going to talk about the legislative session because I do think so much of this is going to come down to, does Hartford have the resources to implement this plan effectively, especially through a leadership transition? And we know there are growing threats at the federal level to funding as we move out of the era of COVID relief dollars into an era of more and more federal, both formula funds being in jeopardy, but also grants. So just today, we saw a whole series of educator support grants. So the Supporting Educator Effectiveness Development, the federal seed grants are being eliminated across the country, and other efforts that could be going to programs like this. So it'll be even more critical for states like Connecticut to step up and ensure districts like Hartford have the resources needed to move forward. So with that, I'm also going to ask Richard to come up and join us. And we're going to have a quick conversation with Richard and Carolyn to go into the depth of our recommendations a little more and learn about their experiences in their classroom that drove them to think about these issues. And then we'll have the superintendent come back up and we'll just open it up for questions. And then at the end, we'll talk about how we can all take collective action to ensure that we have the resources necessary to move this forward. So first, thank you, Carolyn, for opening us up and sharing the recommendations. Welcome, Richard. Richard, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Testing. My name is Richard DeMay. I'm a proud teacher of Hartford Public Schools. I currently teach at Global Communications Academy. This is my 18th year in the district of 34 years in education.
And I introduced myself already, but yeah, Caroline Dowd at ESM. I teach preschool. I've been in the classroom for 12 years.
Okay, so we're framing this through an acknowledgement that there are limited resources in the district. And so I'd love to know, and maybe we can start with you, Carolyn, and then come to you, Richard. Given the financial constraints that we know exist, how do you think resources should be prioritized to really drive the biggest impact for students?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, especially considering that we understand the value of, like you said, making sure that we're retaining and recruiting high-quality educators, but especially in special education. It's because it's not just about the classrooms and the special education classrooms, but it's also about the ecosystem of the entire schools. So when you have that number of, such a high number of students who are not being serviced in the ways that they deserve and should be, you know, it's impacting not only their education, but also the education of other students and also the teachers who are helping to support them. And so I think without teachers in classrooms, you know, nothing that we will try to implement can really have an impact if the students are not being met where they are and met where they deserve to be met. And also we know that each teacher we lose costs the district about $20,000, and so we're currently spending a lot of money on turnover. It's a really expensive, an unfortunate circumstance. So I think thinking about this as an investment where we're going to be getting long-term dividends that pay off financially and in terms of student outcome in the long run is a strong way to think about where to position those financial resources.
What would you add, Richard?
Oh, okay. We're not here with a wish list of everything we'd like to see. We're here with focused priorities based on data and teacher input. Looking at the governor's recent proposal for fiscal year 2027, which includes $40 million in additional excess cost grant funding and a new $14 million special education incentive grant program, we have a real opportunity ahead. But we can't access these resources effectively if we don't address our current staffing crisis. When 31% of our special education positions are vacant, that affects every classroom in the district. General education teachers are stretched thin, trying to provide services they're not trained for, while special education teachers are handling impossible caseloads. We need to stabilize our workforce now so we're positioned to maximize these future resources and build sustainable in-district programs.
So that talks a little bit about why we honed in on special education. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we can work on, but the reason we honed in on it is the crisis feels so real. In the current contract, and I think maybe in the new contract this is even growing, there's the ability to give one-time signing bonuses to try to recruit teachers in of at least $5,000 for designated hard-to-staff areas. You all are saying that's not enough. Just a signing bonus isn't enough. You're calling for base salary increases. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think that's so crucial?
Yeah, so there's research that shows that one-time bonuses, while exciting and well-intentioned, don't necessarily work to solve long-term retention problems. And in fact, there have been teachers who have reported that signing bonuses kind of feel frustrating because the next year it's kind of the illusion of like a pay decrease. And you're like, well, that is not great. We don't love that. And there are evidence of success stories in other districts across the country. So for example, in Detroit, there was an implementation of a $15,000 annual differential, and they saw significant improvements in their special education vacancies. So there is evidence that it does work if you're able to implement like a sustained increase in salary, especially in those really hard to staff areas. And so that research showing maybe between $5,000 to $10,000 annually is really what you need to make that difference in recruitment and retention. And it's not really about making teaching lucrative, like that would be great, but it's more about making sure that it's sustainable for the people that are involved in the profession and who are interested in becoming involved in the profession. Richard.
Sure. And we know that this approach works. The report cites examples from Hawaii and Georgia where similar differentials reduced vacancies by 32% and attrition by 25% respectively. This reality is that without stable staffing, other initiatives cannot succeed. We can have the best curriculum materials in the world, but they won't help students if we don't have teachers in classrooms to implement them. The timing is particularly critical now, given Governor Lamont's announcement about significant state support coming in fiscal year 2027, including, as Caroline said, a $40 million increase in excess cost grant and a new $14 million high-quality special education incentive grant program. These resources will help districts manage the rising cost of special education services, but we still need to focus on the foundation of staffing first. In our survey, 71% of teachers put additional pay for hard-to-staff positions in their top 3 priorities. This shows a broader understanding among our colleagues that stabilizing our special education staffing isn't just about those positions. It's about creating the conditions that allow all of us to do our best work for students. With the state's commitment to supporting special education programming starting in 2027, now is the perfect time for Hartford to invest in retention strategies that will ensure we have the staffing stability to maximize these upcoming resources.
So you guys both make a strong case for why incentives, but I'm thinking about all the other teachers in the building, and it might seem like, well, why special educators? Why not all the teachers in the building? And we talked about limited resources. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about what's the impact of having shortages in special ed, in particular on the rest of the building or on student learning in your building?
Yeah, I mean, so we have special education teachers managing caseloads that are supposed to be split between 3 and 4 different teachers. I know at our school in particular, for most of the school year, we had 1, and we were supposed to have 4. And so she was covering a vast number of cases that she was more than she was capable of doing, which meant that in my preschool program there are 3 rooms, and she wasn't able to service all 3 rooms, and therefore there were students that had to be basically distributed evenly between 2 rooms, which is how I ended up with a large number of special education students. And I'm happy to have them. I love them. They're wonderful, but it does challenge. It does present a challenge both for myself as somebody who does not have the resources to be able to provide them with the kind of support and specialized education that they need on my own basis, but then also to service and make sure that my general ed students are getting the kind of care and support that they need as well. For our special education teachers, it forces them to make impossible decisions, kind of like what you were saying. Like if they're, you only have so much time and there's X number of students, you can't do everything. And I think that is really problematic, for the entire school. It creates a big burden on everyone, because every teacher in that building understands that everybody is stretched and trying to make their own best decisions, and that it's not impacting all of the students at the best level that they should be. And then on top of that too, there are about 50% of students with disabilities who are chronically absent last year, compared to 38% of students overall. And I know that's true in my room. A lot of the students who are most chronically absent are my students who are in special education. And a lot of parents report keeping them home because their children are not getting the appropriate levels of staffing and response and resources that they deserve. And one of my parents has reported that to me as well. So it impacts everybody. Yeah, Richard?
Yeah. This affects all students, not just those with special needs. When we're understaffed, everyone suffers. The recent NAEP scores really highlight this. While Connecticut as a whole was able to maintain its performance levels, our economically disadvantaged students are still performing below their peers nationally in grade 4 mathematics and reading. This persistent achievement gap underscores why we need to be strategic about our investments. When we're understaffed in special education, it creates a cascade effect that impacts everything from classroom management to teacher collaboration time to our ability to implement new curriculum effectively. We cannot effectively address achievement gaps or implement new academic initiatives if we don't first stabilize our teaching force. That's why we're advocating for targeted solutions that will benefit everyone. By stabilizing our special education staffing, we create the foundation that allows all of us, teachers and students alike, to focus on instruction and learning rather than constantly trying to fill staffing gaps.
And so we're going to close tonight talking about the actions we can take at the state level. The superintendent mentioned several of them. Connecticut is one of 2 states that does not have a special education weighting. So even with a $14 million incentive, that is a step in the right direction, it is far from sufficient compared to what other states across the country are doing. And the timeline for fully funding the ECS formula seems to keep getting dragged out longer and longer. And so how do we expedite that to make sure it happens now in the face of these other cuts? But before we call the superintendent back up, one last question for both of you, and maybe Richard, will start with you this time. So there's been this parallel process where we've been sending teacher perspective over to the district. The district's been building this plan, engaging with lots of other people. How do we make sure that that doesn't stop when the plan is finished? The best plan is one that is iterative and is continually learning and development. What recommendations, or what do you think should happen to create real feedback loops on an ongoing basis as this plan rolls out?
Yeah. So one thing we heard repeatedly in our focus groups was that there's often a disconnect between teachers and school leaders when it comes to implementing district initiatives. Sometimes school leaders don't have the specific training or context needed. For example, one special education teacher shared that when they asked for instructional feedback, their principal said, "You don't have to worry about that," because they saw special education differently. That's why we need the superintendent and central office to play an active role in creating these feedback loops. Regular direct communication channels between teachers and district leadership can help identify these gaps and ensure school-level implementation aligns with district vision. Different schools face different challenges, and having district leadership engaged in these conversations helps ensure consistent, effective implementation across all schools. What have you seen?
So I think, throughout this entire process, we've seen the power of teacher voice. So with our survey, over 319 teachers were able to contribute their insights to help shape these recommendations for the district. And we are especially grateful for the current superintendent and the administration for their willingness to engage in this collaborative process and truly listen to teacher input. I think it's really helped form a strong foundation for us to be able to build on going forward and really work towards positive change. So we're looking forward as we plan for this transition in leadership, and we want to build on the momentum that we've worked on and created here today. And I think the superintendent search presents an opportunity to find somebody who will continue and deepen this level of commitment to listening to and reaching out towards teacher voice, and allowing us to be able to voice our wants and needs, and not only for us, but also for the students in our classrooms. Because like we said, it's not just an HR issue, it's really fundamental to student success and student outcomes. So the strategic planning process, I think, has shown what's possible when teacher voice and district leadership comes together and is able to collaborate and really work together. So we're looking forward to continuing this partnership with HPS and the next leadership within the superintendent, but also Board of Ed. We're glad you guys are here as well. So thank you so much for coming.
Great. So we'll invite Superintendent Torres-Rodriguez back up, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Questions about the work that E4E teacher leaders did to gather this input, questions about the strategic plan as it's currently constructed or the alignment of that, or anything else that's top of mind for those of you in the audience. And I think we have a mic that maybe can float around. So if you have a question, please let us know. And if you don't, I have like 20 more, so don't just leave it to me.
Don't tell me that.
Yeah.
What is a plan B that teachers would like if the funding, if the resources aren't going to be there? Well, what besides funding can the district do to increase teacher retention?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question because it is hard. Funding is obviously the most valuable thing. Everybody wants that. That's, you can't run districts without it. I think giving teachers an opportunity let me rephrase. Let me start over. So if we can't focus on retention through ways of funding, then I think you try to approach it through other ways that gives teachers more voice in what they're able to do. So for example, allowing teachers to have a little bit more say over how their professional learning is decided. So for example, last year we had a district professional learning where we were actually, for us and throughout the preschool district, where we had 3 different topics three or four that we were allowed to pick which one we wanted to go to and which one we thought would be most impactful. And it was great. Like 2 of us chose one, another classroom who had had a different whole situation going on in her room wanted something else, and it gave us a little bit of say and input in what we wanted and what we felt was impactful. And that was a really powerful moment where we were like, this is great, like we can choose what we need. So I think finding ways where you can give teachers more direct say in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis or on a grander scale in terms of their own professional learning, I think finding things like that would be impactful. I know I would appreciate that, and that's something that I would enjoy it.
Richard, you're in the end.
Yeah, I think traditionally we have relied on funding, both from the state and federally, but I think it's time to start brainstorming of, outside of the box, beyond the box, way out. What are other ways of getting resources, getting funding that traditionally have not been looked at in schooling? So I think it's an opportunity. We have an opportunity to start thinking way outside of the box. And I believe that collectively, if teachers are engaged in this process, I think we stand a better chance of coming to solutions that perhaps no one has thought of before.
And then I think some of the other things that came back in our data pretty clear is that particularly for special educators, like caseloads are a major problem. You heard about that in Carolyn School. That's often tied to funding because that's number of adults in the building. But the other thing that's driving some teachers mad is the requirements and the paperwork requirements for completing IEPs. I think that this is a moment where technology and innovation can expedite some of that, or where we can use other resources in a building to take some of that weight off of teachers. I think we hear regularly that it's like, yes, these IEPs are critical, I want to get them right, but I'm not getting them right because I'm basically just copying and pasting from one to the next to try to get them done because they take so much time and my caseload is so huge. So I think there are opportunities to think about how technology can allow teachers to focus their time and energy on their students in their classroom is one other way. So agency, voice, creative solutions, taking some of the administrative weight off of teachers so that they can focus on our other strategies. I know that question was for the teachers, but Dr. Torres, is there anything you would add to that?
I think it's a +1 on all of them, but excitingly, and just today we actually did a feature of our AI innovation professional learning communities. There are 6 in 6 schools, and teachers created, there are 30 tools created by teachers to do exactly what you're describing. How is it that they can make their work? Is it for, whether it be for lesson planning, for, what did I see? Lesson planning, question stems, I mean, you name it. These were, things that teachers identified as pain points that technology, free of charge, could support. So that's just an example. And I hear that a lot, that if we can't get at it through the resource allocation, by the way, resource means people, like actual money, right, to support people, but also to support time, how we spend time to allow teachers to learn from one another. So there's a lot of different ways to look at resource allocation, but the tool and technology is one that we should all be, at least curious about the opportunities.
Other questions? If not, I'll throw 1 or 2 more out. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Can I just, I heard the 40 million and the 14 million, and I just want to tag in CFO Richard in the back. I know the numbers, but I actually want to introduce CFO Richard. For you to talk about what exactly does that 40 million mean for Hartford Public Schools? Because the number, the 40 sounds great, but when we talk about Hartford Public Schools, it's kind of questionable. And then also the 14 million for special education, it is an opportunity, but right, those are going to be grants that us and many other districts are going to want to go after. And it's resource intensive to stand up a special education program. I am not, please don't misunderstand me, I am not knocking down the allocation from, at the governor's, state level team. That's not what I'm saying. However, what does it mean for Hartford Public Schools?
And hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Richard, our new CFO. Sorry I'm late. I was at the Parent Advisory Committee. Now I'm here. Good timing, though. So in terms of the governor's budget related to special education, so I will name, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but all of the money is for FY27, so not next year, but the year after. When it comes to the specific proposals, so that 40 million, we're assuming is full funding of the excess cost grant. So that's essentially when students are costing 4.5 times what an average student costs, that's when the state kicks in with some money. We're assuming that 40 million means full funding, although we're not quite sure of that. What that would mean for Hartford is probably about $4 million. So out of the $30 million challenge we have for next year, there's no solution for next year on that front. For the year after that, that would be about $4 million. On the 14 million, that is an opportunity to apply for grants to have more programs within Hartford Public Schools, but that's an area in which it's an upfront investment, And then in the long term, we might expect to see some savings, more students coming back to the district, but it wouldn't be right away. So that's why a lot of the advocacy work right now is focused on adding a weight to the formula, the state funding formula for special education. So right now in the funding formula, there is weights for multilingual learner students, for economically disadvantaged students, but there's no extra money given for special education. And actually, Connecticut is one of 2 states in the country that funds special education in the way that it does, where it only kicks in when costs are incredibly high. Most states have some type of weight for special education. It's the most resource-intensive type of service we can provide to students, and often that weight is actually more than weights for any other type of student. So we've done some math, and if the state were to add a weight to the formula for special education that was twice that of multilingual learners, that would be about $15 million for Hartford Public Schools. So significantly more than some of what is proposed right now. So that's what we're really focusing our advocacy around, is adding a weight to the funding formula for special education.
So just building on that, there's also a surplus in Connecticut for the first time, no, not the first time in a while, but there is surplus funds that could be invested in this. So I think what we were excited by is the governor, compared to last year in his budget proposal, he actually had no increases in last year's proposal, and it took a lot of work to get him to fulfill the commitment that they had on the funding formula for the ECS, and I think there's going to need to be a lot of advocacy to put more pressure on them. This is also an opening gambit from the governor. The legislature has their opportunity to put their gambit forward over the next couple of weeks, and then there will be a long-term negotiation to feel like where we land on that. I'm just setting up the call to action at the end, because we're going to need everybody's collective voice to make sure that Hartford students are getting the supports that they need, and that we don't have schools like Carolyn's where there's only one special educator serving a caseload that should be served by 4. So let me open it up for other questions.
But what ask the dumb question? Why?
Why hasn't the special education situation been addressed earlier? And seeing that it's critical now, more infusion for a solution. Yes, it is money, and yes, innovation as well. But the chairman we're talking about. Why?
It's a good question, right? I mean, I guess at priorities, well, but locally priorities, and then competing. I can speak about locally. I know that at the city level, right, the city has had challenges as well, right, relative to their own financial sustainability, and so trying and work really hard to kind of stabilize that foundation, and so that had implications for us. But at the state level, I don't have an explanation, and we could argue it could have been more aggressive advocacy, maybe. We've been at this for a little bit, calling out the challenges and the implications. So I can't speak for what the conversations are behind the scenes. I think that we're at a different moment now, post-pandemic. That is what I'm hopeful about.
The only thing I will add is Connecticut has had one of the most unequal funding formulas in the nation, and over the last, 14 years, advocates have done a lot of work to put pressure on that. And 4 years ago, we saw a major shift, which is the new funding formula that they've committed to funding. It is far from perfect. There are still problems around magnet schools. There's still problems around the excess funds for special education students that go to private schools or don't get the services in their district. And there's this major problem around special education. And the history of this, in my opinion, is basically that Connecticut was a state that said we're going to leave a lot of these decisions up to local cities and towns. That's why there was such an unequal system of funding. The state's made a lot of progress in beginning to fix that, but this is one of the key issues that hasn't been addressed. And I think the crisis in staffing levels around special education and the crisis in attendance levels for special education students is why the governor put a little money in and started to, a big press release around it. And I think it's a good start, but we have a long way to go. I don't know if that's a full answer to your question, but maybe a start of one.
And post-COVID, right, post-pandemic, I think there's no hiding. We feel it everywhere. Our young people have a wider, deeper level of need, and it's spilled, right, all those things show up in the classroom, and then it impacts the educators, then it impacts, right, it's this cycle. It impacts the climate and culture of a classroom, of a school, of a large organization. So I think it's a collision, I think, of all of these elements and a different moment that we're in relative to public education.
Connecticut's also had a near doubling in the last 20 years of the number of students that have IEPs. That doesn't mean there are more students with needs. It means we are finally identifying the full spectrum of needs across the system. And now we need to make sure that they're getting the services and supports. And so the sort of gap in funding is even larger because of that. And they're legally required supports under federal law. So we need to make sure kids are getting those. And so we're scrambling to figure out how to provide them.
I would say one last piece too is that during the COVID years, the federal government provided COVID relief funding. And this is across the nation as well. It masked a lot of the challenges, right? Because it was able to sustain districts for about 4 years. And this was the year when all that funding went away. And so it's putting pressure on the states to actually be funding at the level they probably should have been. We just had that relief that happened for a few years, but is over now. So I think that's also contributing to the moment.
I will say for us locally, we have been, we've been doing the hard work relative to our financial sustainability decision-making, right? We've been in a constant rotation of mitigation year after year after year after year. And so I think that we saw a little bit of a break during the pandemic, and that give, right, is no longer here. So.
So first of all, thanks for all of the effort that I guess been put in place and collecting input from all stakeholders. Really appreciate that. And I just wanted to know like the timelines for the complete process for the strategic operating plan, and if there are any measures that's going to be put in place to keep the dialogue going with teachers so that their input is ongoing.
So I'll share that our board is approving, hopefully, the strategic plan on the 18th of February, so next week. And then there's going to be work at the departmental level. So under, if you remember the slide, I don't know who has the clicker, but for the strategic priorities, if you got a couple more, one more. So under each of these are actions that the teams are going to unpack to determine, okay, there are a lot of actions that sit behind these. What's doable, right? What are the opportunities that exist? Do we have the resources? Do we have the people? Do we have the money to kind of actualize on all of those? And then I'll be making recommendations to the board relative to progress monitoring and what those could look like at multiple levels of the organization. That is actually one of the feedback pieces that we heard, that there's transparency as to how are we going, you know, how is the district moving toward the implementation, and the opportunity to calibrate if things are either not moving in the right direction or there's an issue relative to resources that in year 2, suddenly, right, it is a realization that, ooh, maybe we can't continue with that program that we thought we were going to be able to sustain. So I'll be making recommendations to the board on how to ensure that there's fidelity, not just to the implementation, but to ensuring that there's, right, those feedback loops. And I did take notes around the frustration. I'm calling it, I sensed a frustration relative to school level leadership and not being able to either engage or communicate the progress. And so I'll be thinking, I'm here till the summer, so like I'm not leaving tomorrow. And so there's opportunity to kind of think through as to what are the opportunities there. I hear loud and clear teachers, district level staff, and the need to bridge that. But I also want to make sure that like school leaders are a significant and an important agent of change. And if there is a gap, then we need to address it. And we need to also, like we want to do with our educators, right? We want to make sure that we build capacity at all levels of the organization. And if there are, right, leadership, you know, opportunities there for improvement to ensure that the feedback loops exist, that at the school level, that there is opportunity to, you know, develop, co-create the plans and the execution of the plans, then that also has to take place.
And I would say just from us at like a teacher level and those of us who are working with E4E, I know I feel strongly about continuing the partnership that we have like with the E4E has helped us, the wonderful Sarah Kovac, who I know spends a lot of time, and Ernest as well, putting in, reaching out to district leadership. And so I feel comfortable and confident that we'll be able to continue what we've built on here and making sure that we're still able to have our voices heard as well.
So last question to close us out, and then I'll have a call to action for the group. And this is for Superintendent. And so you know the crisis around special education staffing. How are you thinking about it? We talked about obviously differentiated compensation, which would need to be negotiated as an MOU or in a next contract. But how are you thinking about addressing the real needs of special ed classrooms in Hartford? And what in this do you think is possible or next steps would be?
Look, one immediate next step for me is to try again. Like I can at the very least engage in the conversation again from an MOU perspective. That's an immediate next step that can happen, and continue the advocacy. I know when we're hearing the 14 million that for these specialized programs, maybe that's a way in. Maybe there's some type of opportunity there through the legislature to allow for pilot programs to have differentiated or these differentiated compensation models. So those are two things that kind of come to mind immediately. I have colleagues across the country that have, where this is happening and they've been able to, yes, decrease the vacancy rate, but it's also allowed, it lifts the profession. Right? It might attract other people to want to go into special education student support service areas. And that means that the entire pre-K-12 profession and student body will benefit. So I see it, I hear it, and so to the extent, that I can certainly in the immediate future, I will.
Thank you. And thank you all, particularly you, Richard and Carolyn, for your leadership and your work. So as a last step here, at Educators for Excellence, we are launching our legislative efforts, and we will be spending a lot of time at the Capitol. And our first and biggest effort is going to be focused on the funding formula, both continuing to push for a weighting for special education, and we were so excited to see the alignment with the district around that prioritization, and then also to fully fund and expedite the funding of the ECS formula, which is also a district priority. So if you haven't yet taken an action, if you take it here, using this QR code, we'll be able to follow up with you and collect your stories and voice to be able to engage in that effort. And then another big priority is around some of the teacher certification barriers, which are making it harder to bring special educators into the workforce. So we're going to be working and putting pressure on the legislature to increase cross-certification, to allow other teachers to more easily get special ed certified, so that we can begin to fill this gap. We believe that an incentive for those teachers, knowing that if they went through that extra work, there would be additional compensation on the other end for them, would help close this. I can't tell you how many teachers we talk to who have special ed certification and are saying, I'm going to teach in a general ed setting because of the caseloads that I have, the paperwork that I have, the huge challenges. I feel like I'm having impact in my classroom here. And so we know it is going to take a combination of certification changes, funding, and then making sure that we're resourcing the teachers who are taking on the hugely challenging job of supporting our highest need student populations. So those are a little bit of Educators for Excellence's priorities. It's going to be led by our teachers who will be at the Capitol calling for these things. So thank you all for joining us tonight, for taking this action with us, alongside us. As this legislative session, Connecticut, for those of you who don't know, budget cycles are only every 2 years. So it's a biennium. So if we don't get it this year, we have to wait 2 more years for real meaningful change on this issue. So please take this action alongside us, and we'll be reaching out on other opportunities to engage. Deep gratitude to you, Superintendent Torres-Rodriguez, for your leadership over the almost last decade, and for setting up a path ahead that is grounded in the perspectives of the community and of teachers. And huge shout out to all the E4E teacher leaders who led this process. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.